So this is a session, a pretty exciting one-on-one chat on economics of sustainability. You know, a common question around sustainability is its impact on profitability, right? How do you build a sustainable company while also being profitable? Our featured speaker here is our own Deepak Ahuja, 1985 Sera. Currently, he's the CFO at Verily Life Sciences and is actually soon transitioning to a new gig, CFO at Zipline. And of course, for those of us who know Deepak for a long time, he, in his previous capacity, was the CFO of Tesla Motors. He helped the company through its IPO, in addition to raising several $1 billion of capital to fuel its growth. So in this chat, Deepak will break down the economics of sustainability and bring out some of the hidden issues. Hosting him is Ashish Bansal, 1999 Electronics, who co-founded the IIT AIML Forum to connect like-minded IITians to everything that's going on in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. His day job is actually making ML run faster at Google. He's also written a book on advanced NLP, natural language processing. Please welcome Deepak and Ashish.
Hello everybody, can you guys hear me? Yes? How about now? Yes. Awesome. So, good morning. I wish we could turn up the lights on the people instead of the people here, because in true BHU fashion, I spy enough people sleeping in the back. But I guess I just start a couple of things. I'm really honored to be on stage with Deepak sir. He keeps asking me not to call him Deepak sir, but I think some habits from BHU die hard when you're in front of your seniors. I have many of my seniors here in the audience as well. I did something which was very uncharacteristic of BHU people. I made notes for this talk. I have never made notes in my 4 years. In fact, Manoj Sinha, who was just on before, he was my batchmate. I passed many courses photocopying his notes from the Mandir photocopy shop. That's how I got a lot of my grades in. But today I felt like there was nobody I could photocopy my notes from, so I had to make my own. So let's actually get started. I actually want to start with congratulating Deepak on a huge $1 billion raise for Verily Life Sciences that just happened, and what an incredible accomplishment in such a tough market around the world. So before we get into like the economics of sustainability, I have a question for you. Which was your favorite hostel in BHU and why?
First of all, Hala BHU. Great to be here in front of and with all of you. LIMBY is what I would say. I spent my first 2 years there. Life-transforming experiences, and it's the memories that you associate with the place. And whenever I think of BHU, my room in LIMBY, room number 126, comes in my head. So it's LIMBY.
Fantastic, awesome. I mean, I would beg to disagree because Rajputan is always the best, and I think everybody knows that. But like, it's hard for me to contradict you here. I actually want to just get started with like a very basic question. What is sustainability? Because I think a lot of people have different definitions of sustainability or what that means to them. So maybe I'd like you to start with what does it mean to you, or where would you like to start on sustainability?
So the sustainability covers many dimensions in my mind, and there's a big portion related to social aspects, from inequities that we have in education, healthcare, social well-being, infrastructure. For me personally, the piece that's been my focus has been the environmental sustainability piece. Clearly, the high levels of CO2 emission, as you all know. It's a planetary level crisis that we have. If we don't address it, it's going to be super difficult for us in our own lifetime and our kids. We can talk more about those aspects, from global warming to extreme weather to rising sea levels that we're already seeing. So we need to address it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great area of focus. I think it dovetails into this whole discussion we are having with Manoj, also talking about some of the experiences. You have broad experience across a variety of different industries. You've worked in life sciences, that is your current role. Before that, you've been on automotive, you've been on boards of tech companies. Do you think sustainability means slightly different things for these different sectors, or what are the common threads maybe that you see across these in your work experience?
Yeah, I think environmental sustainability, again, coming back to that, there is so much that we can do, both at the individual level as well as at the company level, and of course at the national and international levels. But I think the fundamental concepts are that we are putting an intense amount of demand on on this earth, which is not sustainable to the ecosystem. Just to give you some perspective, since 1950, our population has more than tripled. It's at about 8 billion now. And per capita, so per person, energy consumption per year has also increased by 3x. So when you multiply the two, the total energy that we are producing today compared to 70 years ago is 10 times more on an annual basis. And at the same time, global malnourishment is reduced by about 3x. So we're producing more food, agriculture-wise, which is 8x compared to 70 years ago. And that's causing deforestation, and we're putting a lot of nitrogen fertilizers. And so you combine all of that, and the lessons are very obvious. We have to conserve more energy. We have to consume less water. We have to produce less CO2 emissions. And there are so many things that all of us can do, and we can talk more about it. And the innovation that's happening, the tech startups, the private company funding, the government funding. It's actually, despite the challenges, there is a sense of optimism that I still feel.
Yeah, thank you for that. While we were discussing planning this session, one of the things that you mentioned actually struck out to me, which is you mentioned 4 products which are very, very important for our growth. You talked about cement, steel, plastics, and ammonia. And ammonia, I'm assuming, is more for fertilizers and growing food. And if you think about how much innovation has gone into those particular 4, maybe plastics has seen a lot of innovation, but essentially cement, steel, like even if you electrify steel plants, there is still the need for coke. And people who are from metallurgy would probably remember, I think all of us took basic smelting and foundry in the first few years, so you probably all remember that, or maybe you don't because you copied somebody's notes like me. But the idea is that it's really, really hard, right? How do you actually drive, because if you're building things, you still need these things, so construction materials are largely the same. Which actually brings me to an interesting point about seeing sustainability from an angle of scale. So, any thoughts about like how scale plays into the sustainability equation? Because I think possibly I would surmise that companies at different scales will have different abilities to undertake sustainability initiatives, but also contribute in a different way to sustainability.
Yeah, I just want to come back to this point that Ashish mentioned. It actually blew my mind when I realized the amount of fossil fuels that get consumed in manufacturing the foundational materials that we consume. And the foundational materials are surprisingly not chips or semiconductors. Of course, they take us to the next level, but it's steel and cement and plastics and ammonia. And we actually consume almost 20% of the fossil fuels. By that I mean coal and crude oil, to produce those foundational materials, and they release 25% of the CO2 emissions. So what that says is that first of all, we need innovation in not just generating electricity, which is extremely important, and what Manoj Sinhaji's talked about at Husk is really inspiring to me. We need a lot more of that. But we also need very innovative methods of manufacturing these foundational materials without using fossil fuels. And there are some very interesting things happening. There's a startup right now that's trying to produce steel using solar energy, and they have this incredibly complex array of mirrors, which they all focus it at a singular point to create very high levels of temperature that's needed to produce steel. So, and then maybe if we talk about scale, the places, we need amazing amount of scale. If you just think of batteries, we're just focused on lithium-ion batteries, but we also need other kinds of batteries that can store energy at the grid level, at scale level. And we need each of our homes to be far more energy efficient. So there's scale. Without scale, we will not survive.
Thank you. Awesome. And I have a quick request to all of my friends at the back of the room. I know you can hear me, I can also hear you. So I will actually request the folks at the back to come join this conversation. It's a fascinating conversation. Speaking of electricity, I think the poster child of this has been electric cars. And you've had a long association with Tesla, one of the leaders in making electric vehicles. I saw a paper by the Anderson Consulting Group, economic group, that says the cost of an IC engine all-in for over 100 miles is about $8 to $12, whereas an EV all-in cost might be closer to 12 and 15. Now, these types of messaging is a little confusing for consumers, because on one hand they're saying, hey, price of gas is whatever, this is much cheaper, and then people are going back and forth, which is, hey, is electricity better or cheaper or more environmentally sustainable or not? I would love to get your thoughts, because you've probably seen this very, very close in with your work. I think at Ford as well as at Tesla.
Yeah. So let me just state my thesis here, and then I'll come back to this paper, which Ashish, thanks for pointing that out up front to me. There have been enough studies out there that have shown that over the entire life cycle of an electric vehicle, from the point of manufacturing, and especially the battery manufacturing consumes a lot of energy and does produce a lot of CO2 emissions. So an EV starts at a negative point there compared to an internal combustion engine. But if you look at the entire life cycle, including 8 to 10 years of usage, an EV is far less emission generating and far more environmentally friendly compared to an ICE engine. And that's proven. What you have, like everything else we see, are articles which sound very scientific, but they have their own economic or political biases underneath, and we just have to see through it. This particular study, they have included this implicit cost of charging an EV, and there's a time cost to it, and they believe that time cost is about $125 to $150 a month. It is possible for many people, or some people, there is an additional cost for charging. But for a lot of people, and I'd love to hear from you all here, there's a saving of cost. I love to hear from others. I find that I save time by not having to go to a gas station. So I think we have to look at all of these with a grain of salt and look at something more scientific overall.
Thank you. That's awesome. I actually have a curveball question, since we're talking about Tesla. I feel like there should be an obligatory Elon Musk question framed at you. So, for no other reason, you probably worked very closely with him. I think you took the company public, and then during the production hell times, I think you came back and helped Tesla get back on track. So maybe maybe a funny anecdote of you working with him?
What I would say is Elon actually is a very funny person at a personal level, more so than he comes across in the press.
You mean in his Twitter feed?
Yeah, that's true. For me, the funniest and which was maybe more cynical or ironical was, we really struggled with the number of shorts that shorted Tesla stock, and the articles that would keep coming out suggesting that Tesla is cooking their books, or they're claiming things that they cannot ever deliver, and all kinds of things. And personally, every time I would read articles talking about how the finance team at Tesla is cooking the books, it really would bother me. We got investigated by the SEC literally every year, and they never found anything. But there came a time when Elon said, I want to actually manufacture Tesla branded shots, which we sell, and then I want to send it to all the shots, deliver them personally, under my name. We were just bursting out with laughter. We didn't believe that Elon was actually serious, but he was. He actually forced us to get these shots made and have Tesla branding on the elastic band, and then mail it all under his name to each of the shops. And so it was actually pretty funny.
I actually remember that. That was really, really funny. It was very witty, I think, as well as a response. Actually, coming back to the cost of EV, and so I cited a paper that looked at EV costs as maybe slightly higher. So maybe you could say there is a little bit of bias on one side. There is an IMF study on the other side, which cites that fossil fuels received about $6 trillion of subsidies in 2020. So, I mean, usually the truth is maybe somewhere in the middle, but I would love to get your thoughts, because if that's actually true, then it's an unequal playing field for some of the people who are trying to do things like building microgrids or alternative fuels. A $6 trillion subsidy is not, in a single year across the globe, is not a small sum of money.
This IMF study, interestingly, they came up with what is the effective cost to the environment for fossil fuels, and that's how they came up with the subsidy. 90% of this was implied subsidy, and it comes from the cost to the local population, primarily from high pollution levels, which I thought was very interesting. They found that the cost to our society from high pollution was actually higher than the cost from the environmental and the global warming pieces of it. I think it's a great theoretical study, Ashish. If we follow their approach, fossil fuel prices would go up by 2 to 3x, and that's really not tenable. We'll go into a global recession immediately if we try to follow that approach. But it's trying to highlight that the real cost to our society is super high. For me, the other interesting part is that we forget that 100 years ago, there was massive subsidization and incentives given to the coal and the crude oil industry to scale up production as the energy needs of our globe kept increasing. And some of those subsidies are still continuing. What we need to therefore make sure is we are encouraging and giving the right incentives for alternative sources of energy. And it's just so critical for us just to do that.
Yeah, great. I think the point that you made about if you assume that the subsidies are true, and if you remove them, you look at the 2-3x increase in prices for oil. And oil and coal, they drive prices for everything almost, through transportation, through secondary effects. And I think we're all dealing with a little bit of an inflationary market right now, and we are seeing, so that I think we can feel what that pain might be. But I think times like this also are impetus for change and for startups or new business or innovation. So I think you serve on a number of boards, you invest in companies. Maybe some ideas or underserved areas that you see, and maybe you can share with the folks here who can maybe take them up and think about them more deeply.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how in the last 5 to 10 years, the amount of money and talent and thinking that's going into some really creative ideas. I'll just share some. So as an example, nuclear energy, people are beginning to realize actually does make some sense. And it's perhaps more environmentally friendly than fossil fuels. But that's what we're talking about is nuclear fission. What's very interesting is nuclear fusion energy, which is what happens on the surface of the sun. And at least 10 startups right now working on nuclear fusion. And what that is that there are isotopes of hydrogen that unite under extreme conditions of temperature and pressure to form an isotope of helium and release vast amounts of energy. And the amount of energy that a nuclear fusion releases is far more than nuclear fission. And also it doesn't produce radioactive waste at the end of it. And there are at least 10 startups. There's one startup that has reached 95% efficiency. By that I mean the output energy of nuclear fusion is 95% of the input energy. Now clearly that's not good enough, but they expect that in a couple of years they will far exceed 100%, and that's what's needed. So I wouldn't be surprised if in 10, 15 years we are using nuclear fusion energy as a source, which would be the cleanest we have, along with a lot more solar and a lot more wind energy. But we also need massive energy storage solutions, just an incredible amount of research and innovation happening there. And at the same time, a lot of stuff is happening with carbon capture. This all seemed like science fiction at one time, but to see how people are working on technologies to capture carbon at the point of emission, at the refineries or at the steel making factories, and then also carbon capture from air, just capturing carbon and storing it underground. These are becoming some very mainstream technologies now, which we will certainly hear more and more about in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think there's a lot of optimism with the kind of companies that are working on globally. And in the US, this recent Inflation Reduction Act that just got passed a couple of months ago, and then the infrastructure legislation that got passed last year, it's going to put in billions of dollars into all of these different technologies as incentives. So I think we have to be cautiously optimistic, but realistically we will continue to see more global warming, more extreme weather, and more rising sea levels, even if we do all of these things. And I'm not saying this to be alarmist. It's a matter of fact that scientists have found. So it just says that there is no time for us to be lax. Here, we really need to keep active.
Thank you. I think maybe my last question to you is more to do with your most recent action, which is raising money in a tough economic environment. Many entrepreneurs out here, any advice that you would like to share with them on how to raise money in tough situations like this? Slightly different from the topic of our talk, but I thought that's something that would be useful for folks. And after that, we will open it to questions from the audience.
Sure. But the market is almost going through a meltdown presently, and so raising money in this environment, if you do a flat round, that's like a huge up round. It's a huge victory for the company. So it's a combination of where you start on your valuation, how much progress you've made, how much you believe in it, what credibility you have, and also what sort of investors you have who believe in your long-term success. It is not easy. It's a lot of work involved there, but you have to believe. You got to feel the passion and the perseverance, and go through the ups and downs. I don't think there's any magic or any secret code I can share here on how to raise it. I've raised, a lot of money in my lifetime, but that's part of the game.
Awesome. So a round of applause for Deepak. Thank you so much. So folks who have questions, Jayam sir. And I have to assure you that Deepak did not hand me questions to pass to the audience to ask them. So these are all genuine, original questions.
Ashish, I have a question.
Thank you.
Oh, Joe.
Deepak, I have a question for you. You know, I've been in California in the last 41 years, okay, since I graduated, 81. But the amount of electrical vehicles we have had in California is probably less than 1% or 1%. Why is that paradigm shift not happen using more electrical vehicles here? Even big companies are trying to do something, but I haven't seen, we still like those Mercedes and those kind of cars which kind of use a lot of gas. What is the reason we haven't adapted it so quickly to electrical vehicles?
It's a good question. Until I would say 10 years ago, the idea of driving an electric vehicle was completely unacceptable to people. There was just so much fear of range anxiety, safety of the battery, and how ugly these electric vehicles used to look in the past. And it felt like you were a big nerd and you were giving up on luxury and all of that. The perception in the world has changed dramatically. I think what we need to do more and more is the economics of it. The price of electric vehicles have to keep coming down. And ultimately people buy a car or they take money out of their wallet when the economics also makes sense. So I think we are not very far from the point where it will be a no-brainer economic decision that buying an electric vehicle, whether it's a two-wheeler, what Ola is doing in India right now and what so many other people are doing is just incredible. They're going at such scale that they can bring the cost down dramatically, and that's what you need. So I think more and more it will happen. It's very natural. We'll see a lot more adoption over time.
It's very interesting. At one point in time, there was a joke which said there was a Prius going at 150 miles an hour, and that was the joke, because people would not believe that a hybrid or electric car could go. And I think Tesla did a lot of work to change that perception. Now, I think for most buyers, it is an equal consideration amongst other cars. And then the financials and other things, I think, start to play in. And if more companies make them, I think they'll become more affordable.
Yeah. But the fundamental marketing approach that Elon and Tesla took was that we're not selling an electric car. We're just selling an incredibly sexy, good-looking car with amazing performance. And oh, by the way, it is electric. And that's the approach we have to use to get adoption.
Deepak,
So, first of all, thanks. I think you touched upon a wide range of topics, and I like the optimistic view that you presented. One question I have is then a lot of the companies, including the company I work for, have set carbon neutrality as a goal, right? But when they talk about carbon neutrality, they end up buying carbon offsets in the open market. And recently, I think, John Oliver, he's a comedian, but of course he did a segment on carbon offsets, and I ended up researching the topic. And it looks like carbon offsets are pretty fraudulent. I mean, a lot of the companies which are giving away carbon offsets are actually not saving energy or providing offsetting against carbon use. So I just want to get your take on this corporate push on carbon neutrality. Every company is doing that, but how do they plan to achieve it?
Yeah, I personally think this whole idea of carbon offsets is a bit silly. Rather than buying carbon offsets, companies should be doing things to actually reduce the production or use of CO2-based, fossil fuel-based products. And I think the challenge or the problem is that the mandate from the government is to aim for carbon neutrality. So it's a wrong target towards which the companies are working. If we focused on reduction, and by the way, we will never get to carbon neutrality. This idea of getting to zero new CO2 emissions is really not scientifically proven or foundational. Just because, as I said, the foundational materials we produce, cement, steel, plastics, and ammonia, they consume so much fossil fuels, we'll never replace them. So I think the approach has to be changed for sure. For example, a lot of companies are now saying, how do we reduce the energy that chips are consuming? Google is spending a ton of money figuring out how do we reduce energy at data centers? How do we reduce the amount of water consumed at data centers? Those sort of approaches are far more meaningful to me than just trying to buy carbon offsets.
Awesome. We have time for maybe one last question.
So, Deepak, this is back to, I'm going to piggyback on Jim's question a little bit. Tesla, right? Electric cars versus car. Which is more sustainable? Because it costs a lot less in terms of energy to carry a bunch of people on board. When they walk to the station, walk back home, they get help. So is the long-term solution for the Bay Area electric cars, or it's things like more BART?
By BART, you mean public transportation? In general?
Public transport.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer. Public transportation, by far, is a far more energy-efficient solution. The more we can do that globally, absolutely we should do that. But if you're not able, so assuming you have a certain level of public transportation, what are the other ways of private transportation you can have? And then EVs, whether it's a rickshaw, a two-wheeler, a four-wheeler, it's a truck, a semi-trailer, it's a no-brainer that EVs are far better.
I think it's also a matter of perspective where there has been a lot more focus on individuals' actions helping environmental sustainability and making a difference. But I'm not sure what percentage of global emissions do individuals in their cars compose of, because there's these cars, there's trucks, there's cargo ships, there is, as we talked about earlier, ammonia, cement, steel, plastic. And I think it's good for individuals. I think I'm not trying to say that individuals should not try and do their bit, or like, can I save 2 minutes in the shower and can I not heat my water in my home and my cars? But there has to be something on the other side, because we cannot stop developing as a society. There's huge amounts of inequality if you say no more construction, but then there's work that needs to be done on that side. And I feel like that's what's been missing in the overall conversation.
Yeah, Ashish, that's a very, very good point, because what we're talking here about automotive emissions, probably on an average across the world is a fifth of the total emissions that we are producing. And that's all we're trying to control. By the way, we can do so there's a lot of energy we are consuming in our houses. Going to smart meters, going to solar, going to electric cooking and electric split pumps rather than oil-fired or gas burning furnaces. Globally, if you look at it, it actually has a pretty big impact. And then beyond that, it's all the other things that consume massive amounts of fossil fuels. Hence, the carbon neutrality idea is kind of hypothetical. But we need to keep addressing all of them, from steel production using electricity and solar to nuclear fission and all kinds of other sources to really make a global impact.
And on that note, thank you so much. Thank you, Deepak, for making time with us, and thank you for the audience for